Welcome to Eurasian Conference on Science, Engineering and Technological Innovations, organized by Automation, Computer Science and Technology Department, QERE, National University, Ukraine, Europe, and Research Culture Society. Our main objective is to promote scientific and educational activities towards the advancement of common citizens' life by improving the theory and practice of various disciplines of science and engineering. The aim of the conference is to provide an interaction stage for researchers and practitioners from academia and industries to deal with state-of-the-art advancement in their respective fields. This is co-sponsored by Institute of Science and Technology, Eurasian University and Scientific Research Association. Today we have Ivan Marinich, Associate Professor, Automation, Computer Science and Technologies Department, QERE, National University, Ukraine. Olha Sadvik, Associate Professor, Automation, Computer Science and Technology Department, QERE, National University, Ukraine. Dr. Smruti Shohani, Associate Professor, Institute of Biological Science, Sage University, Indore, India. Dr. Polkuri Kiran Sri, Head and Professor, Department of CSC, Sri Vishnu Engineering College for Women, India. The time of each article presentation is approximately a minimum 8 minutes, and then the session is open for question and answer for 2 minutes. Sir, are you there?
A very warm good morning to one and all present here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present a presentation in the Eurasian Conference on Science, Engineering and Technological Innovations, presented in virtual mode. The title of this paper is Annealing Effect on Characteristics of Nickel-Tungsten Alloy Thin Films, which is presented by myself, Dr. T. Bhaskar, and Dr. A. Shaji George. Abstract. Electroplating at room temperature was used to create nickel-tungsten alloy thin films. After that, the electroplated nickel-tungsten thin films were annealed at 200 degrees Celsius. The texture of nickel-tungsten deposited films is oriented in the FCC phase. Morphological, structural, and mechanical characterizations were performed on them. On the surface, nickel-tungsten films were brilliant and uniformly covered. Nickel-tungsten film deposition were also nanoscale, with an average crystalline size of roughly 92 nanometer. After annealing, the microhardness of nickel-tungsten was 138 VHN. Introduction. MEMS devices such as tiny actuators, sensors, micromotors, and frictionless gears require soft magnetic materials. Ferromagnetic films and alloys have unique features compared to non-magnetic films and alloys due to their use in magnetic storage media, magnetic sensors, and other applications. Nickel iron, nickel tungsten, and cobalt iron alloys have been widely employed due to their low coercivity and high saturation magnetization. Because the crystal structure of nickel tungsten alloys has the greatest influence on their magnetic properties, a detailed examination of this engineering substance is required for its application areas. Several tests on the effects of various deposition parameters on the magnetic characteristics of nickel-tungsten films have been undertaken in recent years by scientists. Nickel and its alloys have a number of advantages, including excellent wear and corrosion resistance. As a result, in the industry, nickel deposition is required to improve wear and corrosion resistance as well as magnetic characteristics. Electrochemical techniques such as electrodeposition and electroless deposition are ideally adapted to meet high yield and low cost criteria. The effect of annealing on nickel tungsten films were investigated in this work. Experimental part. Electrodeposition of nickel tungsten alloy films were prepared with electrolyte baths consisting of sodium tungsten, nickel sulfate, ammonium sulfate, boric acid, and saccharin, and operating at temperature 30 degrees Celsius. The deposition process took 15 minutes to complete. Copper and stainless steel substrates with dimensions of 1.5 cm into 7.5 cm was used as cathode and anode in the study. By adding ammonia solution, the pH of the electrolyting solution was set to 6.0, and the electroplating procedure was carried out with a current density of 3 microamperes by centimeter square. After 15 minutes, the copper or cathode was generally removed from the bath and dried for a few minutes. Then electroplated nickel-tungsten thin films were annealed at 200 degrees Celsius. Scanning electron microscope was used to describe the surface nature of nickel-tungsten films. Energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy was used to look at the atomic composition of film deposits, and X-ray diffraction were used to look at the crystal structure of the deposits. Vickers hardness test was used to determine the micro-hardness of the films. Elemental composition of nickel-tungsten thin films. The elemental composition of nickel-tungsten films was determined by EDAX analyzer. The obtained data by this analyzer are shown in Table 1. From result, after annealing, tungsten increased and nickel decreased. Morphological observation. Surface appearance of nickel-tungsten thin films at 30 degrees Celsius and annealed thin film were analyzed by scanning electron microscope images, and they are shown in Figure 1. The thin films are bright and uniformly coated on the surface. They are crack-free by appearance. Structural characters. Structural characteristic from XRD data, results of deposited materials prepared with temperature 30 degrees Celsius and annealed thin film are shown in Figure 2. From XRD pattern of nickel tungsten, crystal formation of deposits can be concluded. The size of crystals can be determined by formula crystal size T is equal to 0.955 lambda by beta cos theta, where beta is FWHM at 2 theta, lambda is wavelength of incident light. The XRD results of nickel tungsten films have shown face-centered cubic phase with 3 diffraction peaks. The nanocrystallite deposits was obtained. Mechanical properties. Microhardness measurement of deposits was done by Vickers hardness tester. The hardness values of thin films at room temperature 30 degrees Celsius and annealed thin film are shown in Table 3. Annealing process increases the hardness because of onset formation of crystal deposits during electrodeposition process. Conclusion. An alloy thin films nickel tungsten has been prepared by electrodeposition method. The characteristics of nickel tungsten films were observed. From EDAX result, tungsten increased and nickel decreased after annealing. The XRD results of nickel tungsten films have shown face-centered cubic phase with 3 diffraction peaks. The thin films prepared with annealing process are bright and uniformly coated on the surface. They are crack-free by appearance. The hardness values of thin films after annealing process increases. Thank you.
The chairpersons and or anyone have you, Thomas, with us. Sir, are
Yes,
you
madam.
ready
Yes, I am.
with your
Yes,
presentation?
yes, yes.
Okay, sir.
The Eurasian conference for giving me a chance to present my paper. My paper is on fostering significant role of general educators in implementing midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disability in an inclusive classroom setting in Wayanad district of Kerala. Introduction. Education is the most key component in bringing about social, finance, and progressive action. In the 21st century, a more well population with the necessary knowledge, attitude, and skill is critical for economic and social growth. Education is the most powerful tool for achieving social mobility, a critical component of establishing just and equal society. The scheme was highly landed and even the World Bank admired it. The Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, initiated the National Program of Nutritional Support to Primary Education Midday Meal Scheme as a centrally founded scheme on August 15, 1995, after the acknowledging its benefits. Statement of the problem. The midday meal scheme was first implemented for children aged 6 to 11 years to maximum enrollment and decrease the school dropout rates, which were significant from the perspective of universalization of essential education, as well as reaching higher literacy rate in the nation. To achieve this aim, the study will focus on several outcomes related to the role of general educators in successful implementation of midday meal scheme in Kerala's Wayanad district. Therefore, the study entitled Fostering Significant Role of General Educators in Implementing Midday Meal Scheme for Students with Intellectual Disability in an Inclusive Classroom Setting in Wayanad district of Kerala. Objective of the study: to find out the awareness on midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disability among general educators working in an inclusive classroom setting in Wayanad district of Kerala. To find out the advantages of midday meal scheme from the general educators responsible for providing inclusive education for students with intellectual disability in the Wayanad district of Kerala. Research questions. What is awareness on the midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disability among general educators working in an inclusive classroom setting in the Wayanad district of Kerala? What are the advantages of midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disability from the viewpoint of general educators working in an inclusive classroom setting in the Wayanad district of Kerala? Methodology, research design. The study was designed on descriptive research methodology. Sampling technique. A total of 60 general educators were chosen for the study. Tool development. The investigator will establish a tool in the form of a rating scale for general educators working in an inclusive classroom setting in the Wayanad district of Kerala. Variables of the study: the age, gender, education qualification, experience, types of service, residence, and income have been used as an independent variables by the investigator. Data collection procedure. In Kerala's Wayanad district, general educators concerned about the inclusion of students with intellectual disability in an inclusive classroom have been recognized. The school authorities were given the questionnaire to distribute it to the general educators. Data collection. To assist with the sufficient data processing, the statistical program for the social science SPS 20 was used. The major finding of the study. What is the awareness of midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disability among general educators working in an inclusive classroom setting in the Wayanad district? Interpretations. From the result, it concludes that the mean score scored 49.29 of the level of awareness about midday meal scheme among general educators working in an inclusive setting in the state of Kerala more than the mean value 24.63. Therefore, the researcher conclude that the level of awareness on midday meal scheme for the students with intellectual disabilities average score lies in the interval of 35 to 50, which is average. The major second research question: what is awareness of midday meal scheme for the students? Advantage of the midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disability in the viewpoint of general educators working in an inclusive classroom setting. Interpretation. The study attempt to find out the mean score 44.20 of the level of advantage toward midday meal scheme among general educators working in inclusive classroom setting in the state of Kerala is more than the mean value, 22.10. Therefore, the researcher conclude that the level of advantage of midday meal scheme for students with intellectual disabilities average score. Average score is lies in the interval of 35 to 50, which is average. Conclusion. In Kerala's Wayanad district, in the midday meal scheme, which is one of the world's biggest school feeding initiative has increased school children's enrollment and attendance as well as their nutritional position by reducing the malnutrition rate. General educators play a key role in the execution of a midday meal scheme in schools to make sure clearness and honesty, all the features of scheme implementation. Midday meal scheme was also revealed to more common in a rural area of the Wayanad district of Kerala. As an outcome, where you live totals. This is because government difficulties play a significant role in the success or failure of midday meal scheme in any state or area. The current study finding indicate that midday meal scheme have a significant influence on the enrollment, retention, and dropouts rates, but the program faces a range of problems during the implementation in the district of Kerala. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thomas for presenting an insightful presentation on midday meal. Now I would request the chairpersons to, if you have any question, you can ask, or anyone present here having any perspective or any comment, please feel free to share with us.
Prashanti, PhD scholar, Department of HDFS, College of Community Science, Hyderabad. My study is a study on participation of farm women and their relative empowerment in rural areas of Telangana. Why I have women are very ignored and illiterates and poor, their lack of education, so their lack of empowerment is there. Here I have chosen the experimental research design, and 4 villages I have selected in Gadwala, Jogulamba Gadwala district in Telangana, Palvai, Pavanampalli, Amaravai and Ulgepalli. Total sample 120 sample and 20 to 60 age groups. And I have used empowerment scale, and this is empowerment like making a decision making, self decisions and joint decisions. And self decisions, it's combined children, personal and household, and joint decisions, it includes personal, children and household affairs. And coming to the introduction, India has been an agrarian country. Women constitute about 66% of the agriculture workforce, around 48% of self-employed farmers, and the rural women participate in a broad range of agriculture activities like drying, storing and feeding and family from the harvested products. And these are all the major things doing farm women. So their lack of empowerment. So I have measured this scale. And coming to the studies related to empowerment, some of the studies here is there, and Rajia and Muhammad, and their majority of rural family, most of the decision regarding household and agriculture matters are taken up the family and head alone, and wife is only the household matters and being involved for taking independent or joint decisions in agriculture matters. And coming to the Bono in 2014 started the participation of women in decision making likely to be affected the socio-economic status of women, gender difference in lead by women to suppress the decision making and various issues occurring their daily activities. And these are the studies, and I have chosen this district in Telangana state, Joglamba, Gadwala district, and these are the my sample selected villages: Palvai, Pavanampalli, Amaravai, and Ulgepalli. Total sample 120 sample. Each villages have taken 30 farm women, and these are the my sample farm women pictures here I have included, and these are the my objective: a study on involvement of farm women and their relative empowerment in self decisions and joint decisions in rural areas of Telangana. Dependent variable here, empowerment scale. Here I have used tools empowerment scale derived by Dr. Sharda Devi 2002, and here statistical analysis and frequencies and percentage. Coming to the results, and I have chosen empowerment scale. Empowerment scale divided to kind of decision. We can measure self decisions and joint decisions. Self decisions, it's related to personal affairs, children affairs, and household affairs. And joint decision, it's related to personal affairs, children affairs, and household affairs. And these are the empowerment scales what I have used in this scale. Everything I have mentioned, and here resources available. Farm women are using resources into their particular task, and access to resources. Women access to resources in their family to person a particular task, and decision making. Women were taking decisions in their family, and action taken. Women action in getting a particular task done. And coming to the results, and first here I have presenting my tables and self decisions regarding children affairs, personal affairs, and household affairs. And coming to the personal affairs, all the 120 farm women were they're taking self decisions very low. Here the picture shows, and they're taking self decisions and personal affairs very low level. And coming to the self decisions and children affairs, and farm women were taking decisions about their children very low. And coming to the self decisions and household affairs, and here also self decisions regarding household affairs, farm women were taking their decisions are very low. And coming to the joint decisions, here farm women were taking their joint decision. It is included their spouse also. So here they're taking their personal affairs and very low decision making, and joint decisions coming to the children affairs, and here also they're very low. And joint decisions and household affairs coming to in these pictures, and their household affairs also very low. So based on these results, total farm women were in Telangana state low level of its related self decisions and joint decision. So when women, how we empower to the women, when we are providing education to the women, they can improve themselves. So here low level of their self decisions and joint decisions, when measured the empowerment scale, they were in low level. So when we are giving to the decision making, like life skills education, their low empowerment, when we are giving education to the women, they can improve their skills, like decision making skills they will improve after they will get their empowerment. So a life skills education will help to the women increase their empowerment skills and increase their self decisions and joint decisions. When we are conducting this study in the farm women, they increase themselves and they increase their society also. This is my conclusion. This is the part of my study. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening session on women empowerment. Now,
Yes,
I would like to ask if anyone having any questions, or if anyone want to share his or her experience, you can share with us.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anyone? Or we can move forward. Okay, then next we have Aruna Suryanarayan Sharma.
Yes, ma'am, I'm present.
Okay, ma'am.
I'm sharing my screen, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
I'm Aruna Sharma, research scholar, Ganpati University, Gujarat, India. My topic for today is analysis of one-dimensional groundwater recharge by spreading using hybrid differential transform finite difference method. The objective of my study is to find the soil moisture content when the groundwater is being recharged by water, which is spreading vertically in the downward direction. The mathematical formulation which I have done for this problem gives me a nonlinear partial differential equation, which is called as Berger's equation. The nonlinear partial differential equations normally which we get are difficult to solve by analytical methods, and numerical methods are normally used to solve such differential equations. So the numerical solution of this Berger's equation, I'm solving it using my hybrid differential transform finite difference method. Now, before I go into the complexities of the mathematical formalities, I just would like to give a brief overview of what I'm talking when I'm saying groundwater, recharge, spreading. What do I mean by these terminologies? Whenever we talk of water, we always feel that it exists in ponds, lakes, rivers, ocean. But many of us are not aware that water is also existing under the ground. The water which is existing under the ground is called as groundwater. And what is this groundwater? It is the water that has reached the voids and the spaces or the pores and the cracks in the rock, and it is lodged in that crevices, and it is called as groundwater. Now, how is this groundwater generated? Groundwater is generated naturally whenever we have a rainfall or we have a snow melting on the surface. What happens is that because soil is a porous medium, so that soil is like a sponge, it absorbs this water and the water trickles down, or it is said to infiltrate down and lodge itself. And this is many kilometers under the surface. It is going and lodging itself in those pores and the sediments or the cracks of the rock. And this water which is gathered as a groundwater is supposed to be fresh water, and it has been globally proved that 90% globally we have a fresh water which is the groundwater. Now, what is happening is that there was a lot of research being done in the past few years regarding what should be done with this groundwater. And now the research shows that this groundwater can be used for a number of applications. Like now, groundwater is being used to supply drinking water to households. We can also use it in agriculture. We can use it in industries. It is also being used as a oil recovery process. And US and Canada are the two major cities which are using 50% of this groundwater for supplying water to households for drinking. And what is happening is that because now we are using this groundwater, obviously it will be depleting or it will be reducing. So how do we increase this? How do we increase the groundwater? So the replenishing of this groundwater or increasing this groundwater is called as a process of recharge. So recharge is a process by which we try to replenish this groundwater. So what are the methods of replenishing this groundwater whenever there is no case of a rain? So we have some artificial recharge processes, and the one which I'm going to discuss today is the recharge by the method of spreading. So the top figure I've shown you what is actually the groundwater water, which is in the gravel and the soil of the rock. The figure which is down, I'm showing you an idea of the spreading. The area which has to be recharged, or the groundwater down which is to be replenished, we cover it with a thin sheet of water, and we have embankments here so that the water doesn't escape out of here. And this water can be filled up by the streams which actually go into the ocean, or the water is being wasted. Now the water stands on this and it slowly infiltrates down. It takes a long time for it to infiltrate down and reach the groundwater and recharge it. So my method here will be, what are we going to do here is, as this water is moving in the downward direction, I want to find out what is the moisture content at a particular depth and at a particular time. So this will be the application which I will be solving today by making use of my numerical method. So once I have given you the preliminary idea of what is the application that I'm doing, I'm going ahead and giving you the problem statement. So this is a nonlinear partial differential equation, Berger's equation, which is used to model the phenomena of groundwater recharge. Here, the parameters which I'm going to use, theta is the moisture content which we are going to find out. Theta is dependent on the time t and the depth z. So theta is called as the function of t and z. So we are talking of partial derivatives because I have more than one variable. And the initial conditions, I have assumed that theta is satisfying this initial condition at time t equal to 0. Initial time theta at z0 is given by my exponential function. I'm taking the depth here, I'm studying it as 1 unit from 0 to 1. So I'm assuming that I'm going to find out the moisture content when z is going from 0 to 1. So when z is equal to 0, I've taken the boundary condition here. When z is equal to 0, I've taken the boundary condition very close to 0 because z is equal to 0 is at the top of the surface, which is still unsaturated. So my moisture content is close to 0. When z is equal to 1, I'm assuming that the moisture content, the water has reached down. So the moisture content is 1 at the bottom of this length, which I have considered for my problem here. So the solution of this problem, I can always find out this moisture content for any z going from 0 to 1 for any time t. So my solution here that I'm going to use a hybrid method. Why we call it as a hybrid method? Because I'm using a combination of the differential transform method and the finite difference method. So the method is, since it's a combination of this, we have the better of the two coming out. I use the flexibility of the differential transform and the efficiency of the finite difference method. Because of this, the computational time here will be reduced and the numerical solution is obtained by making use of a simple iterative or a recurrence relation. The differential transform is used on the t variable and the finite difference method here will be used on the spatial variable, that is my z variable. So the major idea of this differential transform method was first proposed by Zoe in his solution of the nonlinear problems in the electrical circuit analysis. And over a decade, a lot of research has been done, and it has been seen that differential transform method helps us to solve all sorts of differential equations, whether they're linear or non-linear. So it's a very important tool for mathematicians. So I'm just giving you a brief overview of the method before I give the advantages. What are the advantages of the DTM and why is it being used by the researchers so much is that the DTM doesn't need any prior preparation. I can just apply it directly on the equation by substituting my values. I don't have to linearize it. I don't have to discretize it because whenever we do this, some error arises. So that error is avoided. Second advantage is that simplicity and accuracy. Third advantage is that it reduces the computational work and the convergence rate is very fast. And it has seen that we actually get highly accurate results when I use this method. So I'm introducing the method, the preliminaries here. How do you find the differential transform? If I have a function u, which is a function of two variables x and t, t is a time variable, x is a space variable. So I told you that in the hybrid method, I'll be applying differential transform only to the t variable, and we are going to apply finite difference method only to the x variable or the spatial variable. So when I'm applying the differential transform method for this, what we do is that the transform is defined in terms of a capital letter. That means whenever I have a original function will be with a small case and the transform will always with the capital case. And differential transform is nothing but an extension of the Taylor series method. If you recall, the Taylor series method is an expansion of a function where we have to find the higher order derivatives. But finding the higher order derivatives by the traditional method for functions which are complicated becomes difficult. So using this transform, it enables me to find the higher order derivatives without much cumbersome work. So once I have used this transform, I am able to get the higher order derivatives divided by k factorial, which is applied to the t variable. So the inverse transform is the original function. It is defined as a summation of this series uik t raised to k, where I give the values to k and I get this uxt. If you observe it, this is nothing but my Taylor series expansion only in terms of the transform which I'm using. So I get my original function uxt in terms of the series in terms of t. I just give values to t. I can solve it for any value of x. Now coming to the variable x, I have told you that we are using the finite difference method on the variable x. Whenever I have a finite difference method, we have to discretize it. So the x axis has to be discretized. That means we're going to find it at isolated points. Discrete means isolated points. So I find this x at isolated points. So I divide the x axis as x0, x1, x2, and so on, which are equally spaced at a distance of h. That means x1 will be h, x2 will be 2h, and so on, which can be obtained from here. Xi is equal to ih for I going from 0 to 1. So depending upon the problem, this is the base skeleton I'm giving you. Depending upon the problem, I can have discretize it into 20 intervals, 30 intervals, just to improve my accuracy. I can also change this spacing. Instead of taking 0.1, I can take 0.05, depending on the problem, to increase the approximation to the exact solution. So this is the background that I'm giving you, and I'm applying this transform to my function by making use of these theorems. These are the theorems which have been established on the hybrid differential transform method. If we observe, whenever I'm talking of a derivative with t, I'm making use of a differential transform formula. Whenever I'm talking of a derivative with x, I make use of a finite difference. And here, for accuracy, I have used a central difference finite difference formula. If it is a first derivative, I've used a first order central difference formula. If it is a second derivative, I'll be using a second order difference formula. Now, with the background of this and with the theorems that I'm going to use, I'm coming to the solution. For the solution, I go back again to the problem. So left-hand side, I told you our objective is to find theta as a function of t and z. For any t, for any z, I should be evaluating theta. So left-hand side, dou theta by dou t is with a variable t. So I'm applying the differential transform to this partial derivative, where with my usual notation, small theta will be the original function. This big case theta will be my transformed function. And my second partial with respect to the spatial variable z will be changed in terms of the finite difference scheme, because I told you that the finite difference will be applied to the z variable. Now this z variable which I'm talking of, the depth, I've taken it from going from 0 to 1. So I have discretized it in such a way that I'm using the interval of spacing as h. So z at x I equal to 0, my first point will be z0, which is 0. At I equal to 1, here I have written this, zi is equal to RH, my h is equal to 0.1. So when I is 0, z0 will be 0. So I can find the moisture content at 0. Then when I is equal to 1, I can find the moisture content at 0.1, 0.2, and so on, which will be seen in the next slide. So what I do now here is, in this equation which I have formulated, I'm going to substitute all these transforms and the finite difference expressions which I have done, so that the entire partial differential equation no longer has any derivatives, but it comes out in the form of a recurrence relation. And this is the most important part of this method. Using this recurrence relation, I can generate any coefficient. That means I can generate this big case theta for any value of I and k. Once I have a big case theta, I can have my solution in terms of the small theta, which is my actual solution. So here I can observe that I can give my values to I can give my values to k. I can calculate this big theta for 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and so on. I can calculate it for 1, 0, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, and so on. So any value of I, any value of k, I can always calculate this. And what is the advantage of this method is that whenever I'm calculating the left-hand side, the values of the right-hand side will be known to me. That is the beauty of this method. So there is no need of any system of equations, no need of any tridiagonal system that we will get. It is a simple iterative solution. There is no solution when I'm calculating the left-hand side, my terms on the right-hand side will be known to me. Simultaneously, I am also applying the differential transform to the initial conditions which I've taken and the boundary conditions which I've taken. So these are my initial and boundary conditions which I'll be using along with this recurrence relation. So I have shown that now. Once I showed you that how I'm going to calculate this big case theta for different values of I and k, I use the original function. This is my way of finding the moisture. For any zt, for any value of z, for any value of t, I have to find out the moisture content. So I told you that I will have discretized z. So z0 is the point 0. At 0, I can find the moisture content. When will z0 be 0? When I is equal to 0. Z will be equal to 0.1 when I is equal to 1, because I'm using this z equal to IH is my mesh points. Okay, so I've just shown the first calculation that at the point 0, okay, this is the boundary condition. I want to know whether my solution is valid for whatever I've assumed. So when z is equal to 0, I'm finding the moisture content at the top of the surface. I have putting I equal to 0 here. So I've got big case theta 0k. So it is a series. So I give values to k. So when I give values to k, I get these coefficients 0, 0, big case at 0, 1, 0, 2, which are already known to me. I just substitute these values and I've got that the moisture content is 0.01, which we had assumed. Similarly, if I want to find out at the next point, next depth level, I want to find out at z equal to 0.1. So what I do is that I have taken z as 0.1. That means my z1 will be given for the value of I equal to 1. So I'm going to evaluate my big case theta for I equal to 1. When I is equal to 1, I get a series in terms of big case 1k. I get my terms in terms of 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, and 1, 3. So what do we observe here is that for any time level, at the depth z equal to 0, I can calculate my moisture time level. At z equal to 0.1, I can calculate my value of the moisture content. Similarly, I can give expressions. I've got expressions for theta 0.2t, theta 0.3t for every depth. And what I've observed here on the right hand side is that this k which you have here, it can be truncated. So the truncation should be done in such a way that I don't lose my values. That means I should not truncate it so fast that I have a truncation error. I should use reasonably well values of k or large values of k, so that my approximation value which I get is very close to the exact value. So here when I did it, I went up to t raised to 10. So this is the method of finding out the moisture content at different points. I have an expression every time, and I just substitute the values of t for each of the expressions which I've got. And now I'm representing that in the form of a table. So in this table, what I've shown is that the formula which I showed you, theta at 0t. So for different values of t, I substituted in the series and I've got the constant value here. Theta at 0.1t, which I showed you the expression. And one more thing I want to mention is that these values which we have got, I can obtain them from the recurrence relation. These are all obtained from the recurrence relation which I have highlighted. So theta at 0.1t, I can evaluate for different time levels. So this is the way that I have got the moisture content for any value of t, for any value of theta. I've chosen my values of t going from 0.001 to 0.01. Now, what do I analyze from this table is that for any time level 0.01, just observe what is happening. As my depth is increasing, look at my moisture content. When it is at the surface, we have assumed it's 0.01. At the depth of 0.1, my moisture content is increasing to 0.04, and we find that when we reach the depth of 0.9, my moisture content has increased. So totally we can say that the moisture content at this time level has increased from 0.01 to 0.81, which actually agrees with the physical situation of the problem, because we know that when water falls on the ground, it seeps into the ground, and because of gravity, and the moisture content increases at the bottom. Similarly, if I also look at this at any depth, for example, if I'm taking z equal to 0.9 and I'm observing as the time is increasing from 0.001 to 0.01, if you observe, again, the moisture content is increasing. Again, this is also in agreement with the physical situation in the problem. That means at a particular point, after some time, you'll find that there will be moisture content more than at the initial time, because with time, the moisture content will be increasing. So both the facts which I have shown here are in physical agreement with the situation of the problem. I have graphed them here for these 10 time levels. I have shown here, and it's an increasing graph. The meaning of the increasing graph is indicating that as the depth is increasing, my moisture content is also increasing. Now, actually here there are 9 lines, but because the values are very close to each other, that is not properly visible. So I made a better plot. I have given a 3D plot here where I can easily show here. Look at the time level here for any constant time level 0.001. As my depth is increasing, this is my depth. As the depth is increasing for this particular time level, you can actually see the points here. The moisture content is increasing, and each of these points which I have shown here tallies with the value which is shown in the table. So for example, 0.002 also I can find out this line here. So as the depth is increasing, the moisture content is increasing. So graphically and tabular also have shown that my physical situation of the problem is valid. So to conclude this, I have used MATLAB to obtain the numerical and graphical solution. The figure, the plots which I have shown shows that as the depth Z increases, the moisture content also increases. And for different time levels at T, it is also observed that the initial moisture content is very low and at Z equal to 0 and increases at its maximum for Z equal to 1. So to conclude this, the combination of the differential transform and finite difference method actually reduces the computation difficulties, and all the calculations are performed easily and accurately. It's an iterative procedure which just needs one recurrence relation to solve the entire problem, and it can be solved at any time levels. I've taken 0.01. If you want, we can increase the time level. The significance of the research is that this spreading recharge of the groundwater can reduce the salinity of the soil because of the increase in the moisture content. We can also reduce the wastage of the water and increase ground availability by avoiding the water falling into the ocean during the excessive rains. We can also control the soil erosion and flood-like events. And this is my references which I have used. Thank you so much for your patient listening.
PhD research scholar in Jammu University of Jammu, J&K. My topic for discussion is change in the forest and non-forest pattern using remote sensing and GIS in sub-mountain region of Jammu and Kashmir, India. As I am doing PhD research under the supervision of Professor Sanjay Sharma, University of Jammu. Content of presentation: introduction, study area, material and methods, observations, result, discussions, and conclusion. Introduction. The forests throughout the world are continuously being subjected to anthropogenic pressure, which are constantly changing the state of our world's forest. Forest degradation has been estimated to affect roughly 100 million hectares of forest globally per year. But to increase forest cover, there will be need for progressive policy initiatives on sustainable management of forests, as well as afforestation and reforestation. The importance of terrestrial vegetation acts as significant sinks of atmospheric CO2 and its other derivatives, as highlighted under Kyoto Protocol. India is one of the few developing countries in the world that is making a net addition to its forest tree cover over the last 2 decades, as per Indian State of Forest Report 2019. It has been widely recognized that remote sensing is most economic and timely means of obtaining information on forest cover changes. India has been supporting a common methodology based on remote sensing with minimum ground verification for assessment of baseline forest cover due to red and red plus effect. Remote sensing and geographical information system has emerged as an important tool for mapping of changes in forest cover of an area. The rapid technological advancement and decreasing costs in the satellite and airborne mapping sectors are making forest cover estimation more viable. The application of remote sensing in forest cover estimation made it possible to measure and monitor large areas, lowering the cost and time. Study area. The area proposed for the present study covers about 414 square kilometers, falls under the sub-mountain region of Jammu district, as well as some parts of Udhampur and Samba district, which lies between this much and this much latitude and longitude. The area is bounded by Nandini Ridge in the north, Kharai or Sarandhar in the northeast, Devak River in the southeast, and international border on the southwest. The forest of the division can be classified into Himalayan, subtropical pine forest and lush Shivalik cheat pine forest, and the forest type is of subtropical scrub forest and dried mixed deciduous forest. The soils covered by Shivaliks are primarily soils, shallow and immature cheat-bearing soils of the division have loose porous drain and good drainage. Material and methods. Geospatial approach has been used for carrying out the study, which includes preliminary surveys, gathering of ground truth, collection of primary and secondary information from locals, etc. Satellite data, Landsat 1 MSS image of 1972 and Landsat 8 image of 2020 from the USGS site has been obtained. Software used to carry out the analysis were ADAS Imagen 2014 and ArcGIS 10.5 and Microsoft Office. These two images has been obtained from the ArcGIS software, and these are showing unsupervised classification. This green color is showing forest area in 2017 image, and the yellow color is showing non-forest area. And in 2020, there is a huge amount of green color is increased, and this is showing increased cover of trees. Okay, results. In the year 1970, area under forest cover was calculated about 256.31 square kilometer, and area under non-forest area was 157.98 square kilometer, and in 2020 area was calculated 279.5 square kilometer. So there is increase in 23.18 square kilometer of area, that the forest area is increased from the non-forest area. That is, non-forest area is converted into the forest area. Discussion. The results of the study reveals that there is increase in forest cover, which was 256.31 square kilometer in 1972, and in 2020 there was 279.5 square kilometer. There is increase in the cover due to conversion of non-forest area to the forest area. As per Indian State of Forest Report 2019, forest cover in the UT has increased by 370.89 square kilometer as compared to the previous assessment reported in 2017. Conclusion. Forest policy of India emphasizes on the biodiversity conservation over production forestry. As per the provisions of this policy, the natural forest should not be replaced by other land use. The only option before us is to maintain and restore available degraded forests and natural vegetation. This has been very well implemented by Forest Department of Jammu and Kashmir, and on large scale plantation drives were carried out in the various degraded forest areas during the previous years, and the results has been shown there. This study is designed with the intent of helping the policymakers in making right decisions, which can help in improving the condition of Jammu's forest as well as increase India's forest and tree cover. Thank you.
Welcome all. I'm Raj Goel, PhD Research Scholar, School of International Studies and Diaspora, Gujarat University. My topic for today's presentation is the diplomacy in the age of big data. In modern times, data is the new oil. It is the heart of the modern development and the increasingly shapes political and economical life. As more data is stored and processed digitally, the management of the data is implication for diplomacy. Just as an oil policy has done for the past 100 years, what is the impact of data on diplomacy? First, data has an impact on the environment in which diplomats operate. The data stream shapes the cash flow. It influences and creates a new geopolitical and based on the data. Second, data is bringing a new topic to conversation and table. From privacy and data protection to digital commerce and digital commerce. Third, data provides diplomats with a new tool to conduct diplomacy, and additionally and effectively, as well as data processing and computing. So the key word here is diplomacy, big data, and the privacy. Data is often described as a critical resource of a modern society, or even the oil of the new economy. Vast amount of the data are generated every day through the use of electronic devices and the internet. The private sector has begun to harness the big data source to improve their product and service so they can streamline the procedure and ultimately increase the revenue. Big data analysis is said to create insight that were through unavailable. So what can we do? So we are moving from diplomacy to data diplomacy to make the best possible use of the data. The various modalities in which operate must be coordinated. We must also recognize when we think of a data, it has generated, subject, managers, and the owners. It can be public or private, or copied or modified, said or unsaid, used or unused. The data can be of many types. In addition, the use of the data can have advantages and disadvantages, have an impact on an individual, institutional, state, or global level. As such, data can be a tool to accelerate, driven, or even prevent the change. It follows that the concept of data diplomacy would cover a wide range of interaction between data and the diplomat, as well as diplomatic principle, practice, and objective. Indeed, as a control, data diplomacy connects and attempt to describe and motivate the method, value, policies, and the other dimensions of the data negotiation. There are different frameworks. Here we are going at how diplomatic framework can be changed with the big data. The characteristic of big data, although a concept, most definitions focus on the size and the heterogeneous characteristic of the database and the current speed at which data is generated, requiring new tools to analyze, compare, and to the traditional data sources. Output of the big data. The definition focus on the new kind of information and knowledge that can be produced through big data, often taking the form, trend, and the pattern and correlation. Big data and the diplomacy. In this report, we are focusing on the automatically generated data of the relevance for the diplomacy, including online data, sensor data, satellite data, and the textual data. The science in the diplomacy, where scientific expert enters the diplomatic process and trying to help and identify and solve the national, global, or a political problem. Diplomacy for the science, where diplomats work together to advance the scientific and international collaborative science program. And science from diplomacy, where scientific interaction and collaboration serve as a tool to establish and strengthen the relation between the nations. So, in which way impact of big data on the core function of the diplomacy? One of the things is information gathering and the reporting. Information gathering is likely to be one of the areas that will be most affected by big data. Big data open up new sources and the new ways of analysis from the social media discourse and the government open data to geospatial information, which can feed into the policy making and the strategies. Negotiation. Negotiation is a fundamental human endeavor. Big data can play a big role by providing relevant argument and insight to understand the counterpart and the support the development and the negotiation position and the strategies, communication and the public diplomacy. Generally speaking, the biggest problem is the big data area of communication lies in the ability to understand the pattern of the discourse. We can, in the public diplomacy, has adopted the new opportunity of the digital technology, in particular social media, to become more effective in communicating with the foreign or foreign domestic public. One of the key area is the consular affair. With the experience in the data management and the role in a service delivery, consular affairs might be the area to benefit from the big data. With increased demand of the public in the interaction with the government, consular department are under pressure to with the latest big data opportunity, so they can optimize the online services. So what other role big data can play in the various diplomatic fields? Big data and the trade. The statistics and the data we have long been the core of the trade, promotion, or economic diplomacy. Big data provide new possibility to monitor and evaluate trade flows, especially when we talk about the cryptocurrency or e-commerce or a new banking data. So other aspect of big data is big data and development. So with its ability to track the pattern over the time space, big data can be great value for the development. In particular, big data can track the could help to track the process towards the SDG goals. big data, the humanitarian affairs. As some of the form of the big data can become available rapidly, or even we can say in the real time, they may be able to assist in responding quickly, unfolding an emergency or a humanitarian action, feed into the warning system. So this can be very helpful for any calamity or any such thing. So big data and international law. As society becomes increasingly dependent on a digital tools and services, they leave behind an array of data which could transfer into new form of accountability and evidence. International courts are now exploring how to use and trace such social media messages, email, or geospatial data to solve international law. This new source open up the new question on the technical tools that are needed to international law to analyze big data, especially to authenticate or verify that data. So in the conclusion, from the planning to the designing program to forecasting important event, the insight obtained from the big data can be used in a multitude way by the deployment. However, to realize the true potential of the data, the official must focus on establishing the culture of the data-driven public diplomacy by investing in the latest big data tools as well as skill of the deployment. Thank you.
Okay, Dhaval Sahija. Sir, are you ready with your presentation? Can you present it now?
All right. All right. Yeah, so firstly, I would like to thank all the organizers and co-sponsors, including Research Cultural Society and QE National University, as well as Scientific Research Association and Eurasia University and Institute of Science and Technology for organizing this conference and providing me an opportunity to showcase a critical review of machine learning integration with augmented reality for discrete manufacturing. My name is Dhaval Sahija, and I'm subject matter expert and independent researcher for augmented reality and mixed reality technologies for various industrial verticals, including manufacturing, healthcare, engineering, and oil and gas. As of now, I'm working as a solutions manager in a local IT company based out of Dallas, USA, into various roles involving business consulting, technology consulting strategy, and digital innovation. Right. So let me talk more about my review article. Okay. So before I move forward, I wanted to provide a little background and abstract about critical review that I have done. So if you look at the current state of discrete manufacturing companies, in recent years, many of these manufacturing companies have been exploring many immersive technologies, including IIoT and data science and even human computer interface, such as augmented reality based apps to digitize overall operations and also to reduce the manual dependence. So basically, in a nutshell, augmented reality headsets and glass, they are similar to smart glasses, just that very, very similar to glasses that you typically wear. And they basically provide a hands-free experience as well as voice enablement to factory shop workers, so that they can perform all their tasks in a visual manner with a hands-free experience, right? Regardless of their task being any frontline operations or assembly lines or so forth. As far as augmented reality technology is concerned, it was basically started being used in space research and gaming and entertainment, and then gradually many government organizations and military operations started using it. And recent years, this technology has been expanded, and now mid to large size manufacturing companies into discrete manufacturing are also using it, including automobile and chip manufacturing and electronic manufacturing and machine manufacturing and so forth. So basically, they are trying to experiment and leverage to use this technology for factory shop workers and overall improving the operational capabilities. Now, what is happening is that machine learning as a technology was already being used, right? So basically, what this paper would do is that we'll try to understand that if in case we are integrating machine learning with augmented reality, And with help of integration, if you're trying to leverage it for discrete manufacturing, what kind of results we can expect, and whether or not the integration can help in achieving the operational efficiency and productivity of human labor and automation as well, right? So as far as the objective of this paper is concerned, basically the article would do a critical review of the current state of discrete manufacturing operations and what are the gaps within it. Furthermore, the article will also do analysis as to how the integration of machine learning related technologies with augmented reality can overall impact the discrete manufacturing operations. Furthermore, last but not the least, we'll also try to do synthesis that could be leveraged by engineering and operations leader to fill those gaps that we have found out in terms of operational procedures and how they can overall decrease the dependency on current human procedures and also make improvements in terms of efficiency and in terms of automation. So these are some of the key insights based on the literature review. So as of now, many manufacturing companies are already using machine learning as well as deep learning and cognitive intelligence into below discrete operational aspects. So some of the key areas that it has been used as of now is that in terms of plant operations. So basically, they are looking at various ways as to they are currently using it to improve the overall machine operations and also overall planning out the maintenance schedule of the machines. Secondly, it has been used in quality management processes, right? So as of now, you might know that at the end of any manufacturing process, there is a quality control and quality check process. So basically, machine learning based algorithms are integrated with cameras, and then they are used in terms of defect detection of the production that has been produced, right? So it is basically machine learning is overall improving the defect detection capabilities if in case these algorithms are trained compared to using a human inspection based procedure. Furthermore, machine learning is also supporting in terms of failure prediction, right? So basically what we're doing is that we are using technologies such as big data and machine learning algorithm that has historic data of maybe last 5 years or last 10 years. And we are basically identifying the pattern within the historic data. And if in case there is any kind of anomaly or if in case there is any kind of deviation in the historic pattern that has been formed, so that deviation has been figured out, and based on that, the machine learning algorithms are able to do failure prediction and predictive analytics. Last but not the least is another area that has been used in terms of machine learning is inventory management. So basically, warehouse managers, they are able to know with the help of machine learning, they are able to get a kind of alert and they are able to get a notification as to what is the minimum inventory level that they are supposed to manage. So in the past, they used to get this kind of notification on last moment, but as of now, they are getting this kind of notification much in advance. So based on that, they're also getting prediction as to what is the optimal time span when they should do reordering, and accordingly, they are in a better position to overall optimize their supply chain operations. So what we have basically done is that in terms of methodology, we have basically leveraged secondary data collection methods, and overall we collected and reviewed on a high level. We skimmed through 240 plus papers, articles, and business journals, and we out of those 240 papers and articles, we figured out that nearly 205 are excluded from the research because they did not met the inclusion criteria that we had defined. Further, they also lacked any strong evidence and they did not have any outcome. So out of 240 plus papers and articles, we shortlisted around 35 publications, and those 35 publications were shortlisted for integrated review. And as far as the method that was used was apart from integrated review was also content analysis and qualitative synthesis for the article. Furthermore, we had also did a brief round of questionnaire and surveys from engineering professionals and also tried to collect their feedback to overall make sure that our study is being moved in right direction and we are not losing any track. So idea was to use the outcomes of this questionnaire as in second opinion to make sure that study is authenticated and it is reliable, and it is not deviating from the original purpose. Okay. So based on this study, following other synthesis and analysis that we found out. So overall, we found out that just to summarize it in a nutshell in the larger interest of time. So overall, we found out that integration of machine learning with augmented reality can definitely improve automation. It can quicken up the decision-making timeline near the assembly lines for frontline worker. Furthermore, it can be also leveraged for industrial training and learning. However, if you look at the last point, nearly 25% of the operations manager, they said that if in case we are able to overcome the barriers or challenges that are caused because of the limitations, then they would be definitely interested to adopt this kind of solutions. Right. So what are those barriers and what are those challenges that are hampering the integration? So below are the findings around it. So as of now, we basically did study around various papers and articles, including domains such as aerospace and machinery and electronics and automobile. And what we found out that one of the key reasons is that many of the IT managers and operations managers, they have very recently, like in last 5 years, they have implemented mobile or tablet-based solutions. So they have already done a decent amount of IT investments in such kind of solutions. So if they want to transit from mobile to augmented reality based headsets, so they need to do value, they need to have a value realization. So until unless they realize the value on the existing IT spend, they cannot like immediately transit to this augmented reality based machine learning integration. Second thing is that many of the people in the leadership, they are more interested to do cost control, and they are very comfortable with the existing performance parameters of the discrete manufacturing operations. So since they're happy with that, they don't want to make any major changes until unless we are able to showcase any critical differentiation that can be achieved in terms of operational efficiency with the help of this integration. Furthermore, high maintenance cost for procurement of this augmented reality headsets and also their post-deployment maintenance is another factor that is hindering the adoption. So as of now, if you see on average cost of any augmented reality headset is somewhere between $700 up until to $3,500, which is pretty high. So until unless they have a clear ROI on the total cost of ownership, which is very clearly been defined, they may not be motivated to adopt it. Last but not the least is the data ingestion. So as of now, if you look at the existing machine learning systems, most of them, they are designed and deployed in cloud. So they are basically producing various kind of reports, they are producing various kind of analytics and AI and so forth. But this outcomes they are producing in altogether a different data format. So that data format is not directly been supported by augmented reality app. So basically, we need to design a middleware that can transit or that can convert the data into maybe JSON or maybe MQTT or any other format that can be digested by AR app. So once we are able to overcome these limitations and barriers that I defined in this slide and the previous slide, then I think many of the operations managers and IT managers would be interested to do the integration and adopt this kind of solution and so forth. Furthermore, once we do the integration, then obviously the IT managers and operations managers were keen to know what kind of benefits or what kind of outcomes can be expected. So following the benefits that we see can be achieved with the help of integration. So one of the key benefits or outcomes that we see is in terms of repair and maintenance. So what we can do is that basically industrial workers, they are supposed to do repair of equipments and machines within the plant, right? So they have hard time. So they have basically hard time in recognizing the machines, the tools, and the part numbers. So what we can do is that we can do integration of cognitive services with AR headset. So industrial worker, he can just wear a AR headset, and with the integration of cognitive services, they can easily enable the object identification capabilities, and they would be in a better position to identify this machines, tools, and part number. So this can basically overall reduce the amount of time that they are spending in maintenance and replacing the part of the equipment. Second is content personalization, right? So many of the frontline workers that are standing on working in front of assembly lines, they as of now, they are one of the hands is been occupied with mobile app or tablet, another hand is being occupied in the assembly line. So if in case we are able to provide them hands-free experience with the AR glass, and then we are able to integrate that AR glass with cognitive services. So what the cognitive service would do is that basically it would understand the behavior of the frontline engineer. And based on this usage and based on this behavior, it would basically provide them a relevant and personalized content in a single outcome, right? So as of now, what happens is that machine learning basically provides multiple recommendations, right? It may provide best 3 recommendation, but with the help of this integration of cognitive service, it will come up with single best outcome so that the engineer does not have to choose out of those recommendations, right? So this can obviously reduce the amount of time that they are spending in decision making while they are in the front of the assembly line. Third aspect is immersive bot agents. So these are basically assistant. These are basically voice-based assistants that you can train with the help of machine learning. So what we can do is that we can integrate this voice-based assistant with the AR app, and using the voice-based commands, the voice-based assistants can easily fetch information such as manuals, schematics, data sheets, or any other kind of procedure-related sheets from the backend that the engineers can easily leverage for step procedures and other kind of product configurations that they are supposed to do in real time in front of the equipments or assembly lines. Last but not the least is industrial training. So as of now, manual or maybe classroom or desktop based procedures are used for industrial training, right? So this kind of procedures, they don't provide real time exposures in terms of training to the engineers. So what we can do is that with the help of AR apps and machine learning integration, we can basically simulate the entire operational scenario. We can simulate the entire task procedures or equipment configuration or any other kind of task that they are actually supposed to perform on the floor. So once we are able, because we are in a better position to simulate the entire scenario. So engineers would be better prepared and they would have an experience which would be as good as real life like scenario, right? So it would basically decrease overall time that has been invested in industrial training. And also it would bring them up to speed to perform the procedure and also reduce the kind of errors that they may perform post training, right? Or the last but not the least is that because this kind of machine learning services are integrated as part of industrial training, it would even understand the skill set of the engineer, whether the engineer is new, whether he's already skilled, and based on his skill set, based on his experience, it would be able to personalize the training content within the augmented reality experience. All right. So I try to cover this quickly in the larger interest of time. So I think if in case anyone has any queries, feel free to ask. I would be more than happy to answer it.
There is a question in the chat box for you, sir.
Let me see. So yeah, so basically broad 3 criteria were used. One criteria that was used in terms of research is that whether or not all the review articles and papers they are providing any outcomes or not, because many times those review articles and papers, they don't provide any kind of outcomes and they don't have any definitive conclusions. They just do reviews and so on. So one of the things was whether or not they had definitive outcomes. Second thing, whether or not these review articles were related to discrete manufacturing processes, because if you see, process manufacturing is totally different. Like think of it like oil and gas, in which the product goes through different procedures, whereas in discrete manufacturing there are multiple components or parts that are combined or integrated with each other to produce a final product such as automotive. So second thing was whether or not it is relevant to the industry that we are focusing. Third aspect that was used in criteria is that the papers that were leveraged of last 5 to 6 years. Because if the paper are pretty old, like of last 10 years or 15 years, we could have leveraged, but they may not be pertaining to recent technology and so forth. Yeah. Apart from that, I also did look at the background of the researchers, right? Because at times researchers are coming from a different technology background. So I also saw that the researchers that did write all those papers that were used in study had relevant technology background or not, right? Yeah. So I think this broad 3 to 4 criteria were used. I hope that answers your question. Procedures are concerned. This were related to product assembly and disassembly, right? So equipment assembly and disassembly. So within the factory shop, there are many equipments in which they are supposed to replace a part, but to do that, they have to disassemble the entire equipment, right? So once they do the disassembly, they are able to do disassembly. But after that, they are able to assemble it in the same sequence, right? So as part of that, they have to exactly identify which part would go first and which part would go later, and they are supposed to use multiple tools. So a lot of time is been wasted in identifying the part, and they are supposed to, they have reference of manual sheets and so on. So a lot of time is wasted in referring those manual sheets and identifying those parts and which tool to use and so on. So with the help of by integrating cognitive service with AR app, we can provide them an object identification capability. So basically, as soon as the AR glass would focus on that specific tool or part, it would immediately recognize that part or tool, and then the industrial workers can use that as an assistance.
Thank you for your positive answers. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I hope I was able to answer all the questions, and if in case anyone has any further queries, then below are my contact details. Feel free to drop me an email. Yeah.
Making it a quite bit of interactive. Thank you, Dhaval Sahij.
Yeah, thanks again to all the judges and all the jury members and all the organizers and co-sponsors for providing me an opportunity to present this critical review article. Yeah, thanks again.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Well, the topic of our research concerns expert systems of assessment of economic insecurity of methodological enterprise using models for bankruptcy threat level assessment. The most urgent problem of modern enterprises in context of digitalization is of all spheres of life is the creation of expert system to identify the state of the economic security of an enterprise. Controlling economic security and maintaining its stable level is the key of stable functioning of enterprises. Recently, there have been a need for the development and implementation of expert systems in the field of assessing both economic security and its most diverse areas. To date, expert systems are ergot systems, and as a result of joint functioning and interaction with a person, significant result can be achieved in identifying and controlling the state of the process under study. The expert system for assessing the economic security of an enterprise is very important for continuous monitoring of the existing state of economic security. Therefore, the creation of an expert system for assessing the economic security of an enterprise using well-known methods is an urgent topic today. To achieve the goal, the following tasks were solved. The existing models for assessing the state of the economic security of the enterprise have been analyzed. The tools for the development of the expert system have been analyzed. The expert system of economic security assessment for enterprise using bankruptcy risk definition was created using methods of the C# programming language. Practical testing of the expert system was carried out on the example of assessing or the level of economic security of enterprises in the metallurgical industry. The object to research is the process of assessing the level of economic security of enterprises. The subject of research expert systems for assessing the level of economic security of enterprises. Bankruptcy diagnostics is a process of studying the results of economic activity of the organization in order to identify quality and identify crisis phenomena and that affect the creation of financial insolvency as well the reason for the information. The system of criteria for diagnosing the probability of bankruptcy includes financial indicators with calculated on the basis of accounting of financial statement of the organization and allowed to use the various methods and techniques. The main task of bankruptcy diagnosis is to ensure timely management decisions in order to reduce the impact of negative financial processes. To do this, it's necessary to identify the risks of bankruptcy, such as insolvency risks, currency, investment, interest, tax, and so on. The paper and in our investigations use 3 models for assessing the bankruptcy of the enterprise. The first of these is the 2-factor Altman model. The advantage of the Z-score formula for predicting bankruptcy is the possibility of application in limited amount of information about the enterprise. We have value, if we have value of our criteria equal 0, then enterprise is in gray zone, and it means 50% of risk it has to be to have bankruptcy. And if we have that criteria above 0, it means distress zone, and if that criteria value is less than 0, that means the enterprise has a safe zone, and it's the last level of to have a bankruptcy. The second model used in the study in the model of Springate, it's based on the Altman model and step-by-step discriminant analysis. At that above 0.862, the organization is potentially bankrupt. To create a model for assessing the bankruptcy of Springate, used financial statement from 40 Canadian companies. The model reveals the nature of the relationship between the individual sources of funding for the enterprise, which allows to identify its financial condition. And the third model is domestic economist Tereshchenko model. It's tried to solve the problem of the impossibility of using foreign methods in the practice of assessing the financial condition of Ukrainian enterprises. He developed a universal discriminant function, which is most optimal for diagnosing the risk of bankruptcy of Ukrainian enterprises, because it's his own opinion, and the optimal discriminant function should take into account all components of financial condition: liquidity, profitability, property structure, capital, and more, and so on. And as stated in the source, iteration cost discriminant model has the following advantage. There are ease of calculation developed on the domestic statistics and takes into account the industry characteristic of the enterprise through the use of various modifications of the basic model to enterprise of different activities. Solves the problem of determining the critical values of indicators, the indicator of the probability of bankruptcy of a particular industry. It should be noted that one of the main problems in the development of expert system is problem of incorrect choice of tools for solving problem after through analysis of the purpose of the presented task and the existing tools, it was decided to develop a system in C#. The structure of the expert system for accessing the economic security of the enterprise defined by the following models: a database designed to store the organization data of the current tasks, knowledge base designed to store the rules of data manipulation, program database with implements a sequence of rules for calculating the level of security according to select methods of the basic of information stored in knowledge base and database. Explanatory component with forms and explanation of how the system solved the problem. The figure shows the component that ensure the function of all mechanism of the expert system. Mechanisms that are integrated with each other of functional target principle are caused by the need for the user to monitor the level of economic security of the studied enterprise. The figure highlights two subsystems of the expert system: diagnostic systems and data sampling system. These subsystems are the following mechanism: technical support, mathematical software, information support, organization support. The solver of withdrawal mechanism is designed to monitor the level of economic security of the enterprise of obtained information based on reasonable conclusions. And in the development and design of expert system, a very important role is played by the creation of knowledge bases. Is the score of the expert system with the help of experts and specialists in field registers of protection projects and profiles, knowledge models, as well as formalized representation for basic concepts in dialogic means of extracting knowledge about the subject area and are created. The NOS-GOG database contains tables, Altman's model, iteration models, ring rate model, and data balance. And the source table is data balance because it contains the source data for phase calculation. The columns have content indicated in table. And the stage of testing or stage of experimental operation, verification of efficiency, detections of errors and their connection, analysis of compliance of the developed expert system with requirements of the applicant. The object of diagnostic was the enterprise of the metallurgical industry for PGC SC Northern GOG, where the probability of bankruptcy was very low for all three models. And using the model, a limited number of indicators allows us to quickly obtain that data of on the financial condition of the enterprise and prevent crisis threats in a timely manner. At the same time, it's difficult to indicate which factors influence the change in the level of financial stability, as well as the provision of information about the further development of the enterprise will be carried out by relevant specialists. Thank you for attention. I'm finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your
My topic is biological importance of selenium element. So first of all, I'm explaining the importance and background of selenium element. This element was discovered in 1817 by the scientist John Jacob Berzelius, and the name is derived from Selene. The Greek word means that is the moon, and the selenium element is a chalcogen, belong to the chalcogen family, like the oxygen, sulfur. Selenium basically found in rare minerals, and it is also found in metal sulfide ores. It also occurs in iron, copper, and nickel, and in the form of a metallic selenides, selenium that is also found. If I talk about the general properties of selenium, like its atomic mass, that is 78.9, atomic number 34. Selenium element consists of various elements, isotopes like selenium 74, selenium 76, and its melting point is near about 494. Its boiling point is 958 Kelvin. Selenium element that is also present in human diet. The amount of selenium in various foods depend upon the selenium which is present in the soil. So selenium element that is basically depend upon the rain, pH values, evaporation, and as well as the pesticides. These four factors also affect the level of the selenium in the soil. For in the table, for example, the age 9 to 13 years, the amount of the selenium that is near about 40. The selenium element that is present in various food items. For example, it is present in egg, it is present in fish, mushroom, milk, banana, and also in cheese, and in other cases in rich foods this element is available. Importance of selenium in physical, chemical, and biological fields. This element shows various importance in photocells, in solar cells, in photocopying, in electronic games, in paints, and preparation of anti-dandruff shampoos, organic synthesis. And nowadays, this element that is showing more importance in case of cancer prevention. So this element, if we compare with the sulfur element, selenium, because the selenium element, if we see the literature survey, this element was considered very toxic. But nowadays, this element that's showing more and more importance to prevent the cancer. And for a biological field, that element is showing more importance as we compare with the sulfur or other chalcogen family members. Now, features of selenium. Selenium is a p block element with having atomic mass 34. It is a member of chalcogen family. As I have explained, selenium is found in rare minerals. Selenium that is essential trace element because it is having its own codon in messenger RNA. Selenium that is considered very toxic since 1957. But later on, that is 1980, it was found that the deficiency of this element may cause various diseases, and this element was later on recognized as very essential element for human beings. And a now recent study also shows that this element this element is not so much toxic if we compare with the sulfur analogous. So nowadays, the biological importance, for example, select, that is selenium and vitamin E cancer prevention trail. This element show very importance to protect against the prostate cancer. Now, the analogous of selenium, in this case, the analogous of selenium, that is the selenosemi-carbazole. Now, nowadays, one of the analogous I am talking about, that is the selenosemi-carbazole. This is selenosemi-carbazole that show the shift basis characterized by the presence of selenium and azomethyl nitrogen. So there is the coordination because of the presence of the lone pair of electrons on these donor atoms, and it show the two types of the modes, that is the Z and as well as the E mode. Selenosemi-carbazole, that is the analogous of selenium. It also acts as inhibitors, and it can also coordinate with the iron in an tridentate fashion. This selenosemi-carbazole that has the class of compounds possessing strong differentiation inducing ability. So this analogous of selenosemi-carbazole that has recognized for featuring the cancer cell lines, various cancer cell lines, and basically for the breast cancer lines to re-establish the phenotypic equilibrium of the parental tumor. So that's why this element is considered very essential trace element. Now, I am explaining my work. So in the scheme 1, here is the basically that is the number of ligands where I am considering, that is the furfuryl and other ones I will explain later on. Now, first of all, I prepared the synthesis of cyclohexanone selenosemi-carbazole. That how I prepared the synthesis. Now, in this case, first of all, 50 ml of ethanol and a few drops of water, and then the addition of a hydrazine hydrate and concentrated HCl. Later on, the addition of cyclohexanone and potassium selenocyanide. Now, the reaction that in this case refluxing, and refluxing process is near about 2 hours. After on, the product which is produced, that is then introduced to the rotary evaporator, and the white solid that is formed, it was then filtered with the molecular sieves so as to protect from the other impurities. And later on, after few or 2 days, the product, white color product that is formed, and it is then collected, and this cyclohexanone selenosemi-carbazole that is then show the various characterization. For example, its yield 70%, its melting point 180 to 182, its IR, proton NMR, and as well as the carbon 13 NMR. So this is the graph, that is the IR of cyclohexanone selenosemi-carbazole, and it's a proton NMR of this analogous of selenium element, the carbon 13 NMR of cyclohexanone selenosemi-carbazole. Now, later on, from this compound, I prepared the further ligands, which I have shown in the scheme 1. Now, the first ligand, that is the 2-furfuryl selenosemi-carbazole. So the reaction that is the 2-furfuryl with the cyclohexanone selenosemi-carbazole refluxing near about 2 hours in the presence of, in addition of ethanol, they give the production of, that is the 2-furfuryl selenosemi-carbazole. So here is the formation of the ligand from the above prepared compound, that is cyclohexanone selenosemi-carbazole. Here is the characterization table of 2-furfuryl selenosemi-carbazole. It's IR, proton NMR, and as well as carbon 13 NMR. So this is the IR of 2-furfuryl selenosemi-carbazole. Now here is the proton, NMR of 2-furfuryl salinosemi-carbazole, and here is the carbon-13 of this ligand. So I prepared the various ligands from the above synthesized compound. Second ligand is the 2-thiophene salinosemi-carbazole. The procedure is the same, that is refluxing for 2 hours with the addition of ethanol and 1 ml of glaciatic acid. They give the formation of a 2-thiophene salinosemi-carbazole. Here is the characterization table. Its yield, its melting point, IR, and proton NMR. This is the graph of thiophene, IR of thiophene salinosemi-carbazole. And here is the proton NMR of 2-thiophene salinosemi-carbazole. The third ligand that is prepared, that is the name is N-methyl 2-pyrrole salinosemi-carbazole. Now here is the characterization table of this salinosemi-carbazole ligand. Now this is the graph of N-methyl 2-pyrrole salinosemi-carbazole. Now here is the N-methyl, the proton NMR of N-methyl 2-pyrrole salinosemi-carbazole. It is the carbon-13 NMR of N-methyl 2-pyrrole salinosemi-carbazole. So the next ligand, that is 4-methyl 5-imidazole salinosemi-carbazole. The procedure that is for all the preparation of these ligands, that is the same. They show the different features. Here is the IR of this ligand, 4-methyl 5-imidazole salinosemi-carbazole. Here is the proton NMR of this ligand, and here is the carbon-13 of this ligand. The next one, that is the 2-imidazole salinosemi-carbazole. This is also showing the characterization table. Now here, that is the IR of 2-imidazole salinosemi-carbazole. So the results and discussion, when the cyclohexanone salinosemi-carbazole that is treated with 1:1 molar ratio with the aldehyde or ketone, they give the formation of the salinosemi-carbazole ligands, and the occurrence, how the they have formed this table, that is the IR spectroscopy, the compound and the ligands, they recommend that this ligand or compound that has been formed. For example, in cyclohexanone salinosemi-carbazole, the peaks that is appeared near about 3362 centimeter inverse NH2, and in case of NH that appeared in 3157, and the bond between the carbon and the selenium that show the stretching bands between 856, and other peaks, that is if we compare with the ligands, that is 2-furfuryl salinosemi-carbazones, 2-thiophene, N-methyl 2-pyrrole, 4-methyl 5-imidazole, 2-imidazole. These peaks indicate that the compound and as well as the salinosemi-carbazole ligands that has been prepared. Now discussion from the proton NMR. If we explain the cyclohexanone salinosemi-carbazole, the peak show N2H that is 9.23, and the NH2 peaks that proton signals that appeared at 7.65, 7.15, and the ring proton of a cyclohexanone salinosemi-carbazole that is about this 2.32 to 1.54 range. And if we explain the synthesized ligands, they show the signals N2H about these points. They indicate that the salinosemi-carbazole ligands has been synthesized. Now, discussion on carbon-13 NMR spectroscopy. Signals due to the carbon C1 carbon of, for example, N-methyl 2-pyrrole salinosemi-carbazole and 4-methyl 5-imidazole salinosemi-carbazole. They appeared at 173 parts per meter and 181.3. They indicate that the compound and as well as the related ligands, they has been prepared. Now this element, that selenium and its related compound and the related ligands, they show some biological activities also. For example, this discussion of the biological activity, that is the anti-tuberculosis activity. Now, in this case, furfuryl selenosomicarbazole, it doesn't show so much sensitive toward the bacteria as compared to that is the 2-thiophene selenosomicarbazole. In the fourth point row, serial number, that is 2-thiophene selenosomicarbazole, it show better biological activity if we compared with the standard drugs. No, the B, this figure, that first one is the prepared compounds that show the biological activity, and the B part, that is the standard drugs. So out of these, the 2-thiophene selenosomicarbazole, they shows the better biological activities as compared with the standard drug. And for example, 2-thiophene selenosomicarbazole, it show the almost, that is the same standard drugs, that is the isoniazid and ethanobutanol. So same biological activities this prepared compound can present. So from out of these, the conclusion, that is selenium and its related compound, they show the better, they show the best biological activities as if we compared with the standard drugs. Now here is the references related to this paper. So thank you so much for giving me the chance.
Thank you all for such a wonderful and stimulating conference, and thank you the organizers for conducting such an insightful and conference, and all the participants have the time to 15 more days till 5th December 2021 for any modification or update in the paper. Publication process will start after all selected papers converted as per our standard publication format. Participants, presenters will receive e-certificate till 16th November 2021. Hard copy of certificate and proceedings book after 10th December 2021. Online publication, the tentative date is 10th December 2021. We are grateful for your presence with given time and efforts, our well wishes for the future collaborations and participations. Thank you all. The feedback link is here in the chat box. Please fill that. And in the next session, we have valedictory session where the best presenter's name will be announced there. All are requested to join again after 30 minutes from now. Thank you so much.